Welcome to the sixth training session under the Technological Infrastructures Capacity Programme. Hopefully you will find it enlightening.
Intellectual property cannot be seen anymore as a defense as a way to exclude competition and act by yourself. It's a tool for collaboration. Technology, as all of you know because it's your field, technology is always developed on top of previous technology, so we are always dependent on others. And technology transfer and all the legal resources and all the legal remedies and the agreements, the clauses, jurisdiction, etc., are the proper way or the proper means to successfully achieve that transfer. So it is not always, or it is not the rule that the technology transfer involves licenses. It can be done or it can be performed through many ways. So you must choose which is your suitable way to transfer the technology. Of course, transfer technology is targeted to the market, is targeted to make a profit. Sometimes the market is the consumer's market, sometimes the market is the company's market, sometimes the market is just at the stage level of distributors or at the stage level of manufacturers, and subsequent stages involve different technologies, for example, or different partners. So you must know what is your market strategy, what do you want to do? Or let's say you want your invention to be used, for example, in a third world country, because that's your target, because maybe your university is funded by some private association, by some private foundation, and one of its goals or its objectives are the development of third world countries. So maybe you want to partner with somebody and focus on that. So there are many different market strategies, but you must know how the market is. And you, of course, must know who will be your final consumer, your final destination. It's not the same to develop a technology and to create a viable product, let's say, for doctors or for engineers than for lay people, laymen. It is not the same to develop an electronics product to be used in a laboratory than to create a new mobile phone or to create a new laptop. So you must know what is your market strategy. Of course, sometimes a merger or an acquisition can happen. Okay, I think all of you know that through a merge, two companies are joined. Through an acquisition, one company purchases other. These legal operations involve the transfer of many assets which are protected, other assets which are not protected, assets that are already licensed, assets that are no longer enforced, but they are kept in the books. So when a third party is involved, when you purchase or you merge with another company, again, you must make your IP due diligence. It's very important to properly know the value of what you are purchasing, to know perfectly whether your strategy will change or not, whether you can profit of those assets you are buying, or maybe they will be a problem if they involve previous litigation, for example, that has not been disclosed to you. Sometimes you merge with a company who is facing the threat of litigation and it has not been disclosed to you. And once you have purchased that company, then you find out that you are sued because now that company is part of you. So that IP due diligence is very important to be performed. Joint ventures, we already spoke about joint ventures. Joint ventures is a way for companies to collaborate, whether they want to enter new markets or develop a new market, or enter a new territory which is completely unknown to one of the parties. Usually joint ventures have a very short-term life because they are only created for a very specific target, but sometimes a joint venture can last for years. Usually when that happens, the joint venture transforms itself in a new company because in the end we cannot forget that the parties in a joint venture have their own business in their own countries. So maybe they have many other assets and markets to be developed in their home country or in other countries. So the joint venture in the end is just another way of obtaining benefits, profits. Okay? And the IP license, well, is the way to obtain a formal document that gives you permission to exploit IP rights. The idea is to have a formal document, but this is, I would not like to enter into very deep legal concepts, but it is important for you to know that licenses are not always granted in writing, and they can be binding to the parties. So in your IP due diligence, you must also look for previous authorizations, because an IP license does not necessarily involve a very formal document in writing saying that this patent is licensed to this blah, blah, blah. No. Sometimes just an email is enough to grant a license. So that can make things very complicated, because especially in your field, in the academia field, sometimes those authorizations are granted easily because they are sustained on a bona fide basis, but those authorizations are not very clear. They do not provide the extent, the length, the term, the time. So you don't know whether the licensee can or not sub-license. You don't know whether the license is to be used in a laboratory just for this product or for many, etc. So, of course, you must also be aware of that and to look for any prior authorizations granted on the technology you are willing to obtain a license to, or the technology you have just acquired through a marriage, for example. And the IP franchise, well, it's a modality, it's a specialization of the IP license. Well, it's a very I wouldn't say restricted, but it's a kind of license where the licensee is not free at all. So the licensor has set a very long set of guidelines and requirements, and the licensee has just to follow the method and the guidelines, the recommendations given by the licensor. This is usually made in business where the method is already proven and successful, so the licensor doesn't want the licensee loses its own path and diminishes the value of the product, of the service. Many fast food franchises are IP franchises. There is many know-how. I wouldn't say patents, because I don't know if McDonald's owns a lot of patents, but for sure McDonald's or Burger King or many other fast food chains own a lot of know-how, and that's technology, of course, but they don't want the licensee to create or develop new ideas. Because the system works, the system is successful, and the business is successful. So if you want my license, you must follow my rules. So it's a kind of IP license, but a very restricted one. Okay? So, technology transfer process. As said before, first you must analyze the technology and its IP rights, choose the transfer method, market strategy, the negotiations and the agreement. So these are, generally speaking, the four paths to be, 4 steps to be taken along the technology transfer path. Okay. The due diligence. So first, all the agreements related to the IP rights need to be examined. This is usually easy. It can be an enormous task. It can be lengthy, and sometimes it can be expensive, because many times these agreements are private. Okay? The IP rights have a characteristic that is they can be publicly viewed and read. You can just enter into any patent office and look for a patent and read it. Okay? So each right has a file, and usually those files can be easily easily accessible, okay, by anybody. So you can read who the owner is, whether there were previous owners or not, whether there are any licensees, sub-licensees, whether the annuities are paid or not. So it's easy to read the story of each right. Okay? I think all rights can be read that way. Of course, trade secrets are out of that, because trade secrets are not registered. Okay? But the problem is when the parties have not recorded any agreement. So you must look for the private document signed by the parties, because usually when you grant a license, you record that license in the file. So anybody can see who the owner is, and anybody can see who the licensee is. Okay? But since it is not compulsory, well, it can be compulsory for some things, but keep the idea that it is not compulsory per se to be effective. Okay? Many companies do not register that. So you cannot be 100% sure whether the patent you are purchasing or the patent you are being licensed to has already been licensed to another party. And then you must perform that due diligence and look for private agreements. Sometimes you will find those agreements in writing, a very good agreement, a contract with its clauses. Sometimes you will find an email. And sometimes, and I think this will be rare, but it can happen, you will find a verbal authorization. Suddenly you will find that there is some laboratory or some visiting professors, some work made by distance, some other work, it happens especially in software development, when the university doesn't have the capacity or the ability to develop software, very specific software. So they own the technology, they own the patent, but they are developing some practical applications of the patent, and they need to hire a software developer. So they hire the software developer, they receive the software, but what happens with the rights on the software? Was there an agreement? Was there a full transfer of those rights, etc.? So that could be a problem. Regarding the professors, regarding the staff, it happens the same. All of you, if you are doing research, You have a contract, probably you will have a clause according to the legal services of the university where it is perfectly defined that any research, any invention, any development belongs to the university, or maybe belongs part to you, part to the university, and you will receive each money or not, etc. But usually everything is recorded and everything is agreed in those clauses, in your job agreement, okay? But sometimes it is not. There are many universities who are old-fashioned, or people who had a job agreement who was signed 25 years ago. So his or her clauses are different to yours. So what happened with that investigator? What happened with that researcher? Can we fragment the technology? Can we say that any part of that belongs to him or not, or to her? So it can be very difficult. It can be very difficult to find out whether everybody has a very definite and clear relation with the university or with the company. So I'm speaking about the university, but sometimes when it can happen that the university enters into an agreement with a very large company, with many people, and the company believes that as a company, as the employer, owns everything. But sometimes the company doesn't own everything, because the law explains that there are some inventions that when are developed during the course or during your daily work belong to your employer, but that is the rule. The exceptions say, and this is identical between Portuguese and Spanish law, the exceptions say that, well, my inventions belong to my employer, but that would depend on the technology effectively developed. Let's say you are engineers, you are working for an engineering company developing a new kind of concrete, for example. But during the course of your daily activities, you develop a new polymer, as we spoke about before, a new polymer, a new ceramic polymer. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with your daily work because you are an investigator or a researcher in the concrete field, cement or something like that, construction equipment or materials. Maybe that invention doesn't belong to the company. Maybe that invention belongs to you, or at least half of the invention belongs to you. If the company tries to sell that, and I am, as the university, I am trying to purchase that or to obtain a license, well, of course, the company can say, I assure you that this is free of any encumbrances or problems and all the IP is mine. Okay, then I will sue you if any problem arises, but maybe a problem arises because some of the employees know what is happening with the University of Coimbra and say, hey, that invention is mine. Or at least I should have a portion of the profits or a part of the profits. So it can be a problem. And that due diligence, that IP assignment, IP rights assignment, due diligence must look for all these relations between the employer, the employees, third parties involved, etc. Okay? Of course, the NDAs. NDAs are essential part of technology transfer. They provide security and they provide easiness to all the parties involved because they can be sure that all the exchanged information will remain confidential. This is important especially in the patent field, also in the in the trade secrets field, because you don't want to disclose anything that can destroy that secrecy. And the parties are usually comfortable, and it is needed, because sometimes you need to disclose some information to the other party, just to show that you have technology, just to show your, well, to find out whether there is any suitable business on that technology. And of course you want that to be confidential, because you cannot be sure whether finally the business will be agreed or will be started. And of course you don't want companies to be picking in your secrets and to know about what you are doing, because you must receive assurances that they don't go to your competition. Or maybe if you are a university, you don't have competition, but maybe they know something and they can use it against you, or they can use it through other companies and make you lose money and make you lose choices and chances of successfully exploit and use your own technology. Well, choosing the transfer method. Well, the most usual is the direct transfer, of course, which is a sale per se, so you transfer the technology. This is rather easy when you are dealing, once again, with IP rights that rely on a title, on a registered document. So it is very easy. This is your document. This number, these claims, this design, these drawings belong to you. I sell them to you, so it's easy. Just pass a number, pay me. Sometimes where there's technology involved, which doesn't rely on any title, as it usually happens with software, for example, the transfer can be rather tricky, because you have to make that previous IP due diligence. You must record everything. You must, of course, store all the documents. And yeah, it can be difficult, because sometimes there's intangible know-how. That's why when some technology is sold, some employees are also sold. This sounds really badly, because people, of course, is not sold, but when some technology is sold, the selling party needs to also transfer some of its own people. And it's very difficult, because maybe you don't want to get new employees. I don't need new employees. I don't need your employees. I don't know who they are, because I have not made any interview. It's not my problem, but I need them, because they have knowledge and they know how to deal with that technology. And sometimes that goes into the same package, and that can be a really difficult problem, because sometimes the employees don't want to go also. I'm very happy with my company. Why should I go to the other company? So, of course, you cannot force anybody to do that. Of course, you cannot fire anybody for not agreeing to go to another company, but the usual solution is pay more money. So that is going to be very costly. So if you have a technology that relies on people, your technology is going to be much more expensive, because with your technology goes around people, and people per se are expensive, because people usually don't like to exchange companies for free. They will look for a raise in the salary or in the conditions, and especially if they must move to another country or another city. So it can be a problem, a real problem. The other transfer method, of course, is license. I think we've already talked about that. The franchise, the same, special kind of license. Usually the franchise, and I think the fast food example is very clear. Usually with a franchise, the franchisee receives the business ready to be used at the moment. So the franchise usually involves a license and many other things that makes the whole package, you take it or leave it. You cannot decide whether, oh, well, I wouldn't like to sell this kind of food, or, well, the experience in this country is different. No, this is the whole package. So you deal with my technology, you deal with, in the fast food example, with the set and the design of my restaurants, my times, my uniforms, etc. Okay, so it's a very, very limited kind of license. Usually in the license, you grant the licensee some kind of freedom because, of course, you enter into a license agreement because there are many things that you don't know how to do. So you need a licensee. You own the technology, but you don't know how to put it at work. So you need a licensee. In the case of a franchise, you know perfectly your business, and you just want to reproduce your business the same country by country, territory by territory. So you just give the franchise your business to start working. In the university field, franchise, in my experience, is in existence. Okay? But maybe, and this can happen in, especially in laboratories and in some processes, maybe you will become a franchise as a university. So, well, it's good that you know how the franchise works, but it will be almost very, very improbable that you will become a franchisor. Well, joint venture or product sharing, I think that's already clear. Well, a spin-off, we talked about it in this morning's lecture. Just to recap, a spin-off is a new entity created by a university because the university doesn't want to be really involved on a daily basis on the technology that is assigned or licensed to the spin-off. So the spin-off is a very good vehicle to use your technology in the real world, in the commercial world. Okay? Usually the spin-off is a perfect hybrid of university and companies and private companies. And it would depend on what your strategy is. Sometimes the spin-off will be the owner of your technology, okay? And you can control that technology through the majority of the shares, which will be owned by the university or the research institution, or you just assign the technology in full to the spin-off and let the spin-off set its own course. When you sell the technology, usually you reserve some part of it to your own use, usually to your research development. And when you license the technology, since you retain the property, you can keep on doing research and on developing new things because you own the rights. Okay, so as long as you don't interfere with the commercial activity, and being a university, that's improbable because you will not be doing commercial activities, it should not be a problem. Mergers and acquisitions, I already spoke about that. And turnkey agreement, direct transfer. Well, turnkey agreement is a special way of making a direct transfer. The turnkey agreement is not so usual in the university field because the turnkey agreement happens when your assignee, the future owner of the technology, and usually turnkey agreements involve the assignment of rights, not the license of rights. usually the future owner of the technology expects to receive the technology working from the first day, okay? So the turnkey agreement is the same as a franchise, but with the full transfer of ownership. Okay, so I say, let's say I want to buy something from, some technology from the University of Coimbra, but I want it to be working since day one. So I can wait 6 months, 9 months, but it is the University of Coimbra's duty to handle to me a technology that is working since the beginning. Since the University of Coimbra probably will not be able to do that, the University of Coimbra should hire another party. So turnkey agreements, when the university is involved, usually involve 3 parties. The one who is expecting the product to be working from the beginning, the university which doesn't know a thing about how to use the technology, and a third party who will be hired to make that turnkey agreement real. Okay? So these kind of agreements are complex, especially if the time for developing a fully working technology is long, because it is probable that the party, in this case the university, has hired to make that technology useful, will create new things or will develop new things. And the owner, the future owner, is just expecting the technology to work. So sometimes it's a very good outcome for the university, because the university, I'm just obliged to give you this technology to be working, but in the course of creating that technology, I find out new technology, so that new technology can be assigned to me. I'm not obliged to give you that new technology. So maybe it's a win for the university, okay? But sometimes the future owner knows about that new technology and says, hey, in the whole package, that new technology is also included, so you must give it to me. So these kind of agreements can be really tricky. And agreements in this kind of turnkey agreements are very long and very, very complex. Okay, market strategy and commercialization. Well, what are the most common agreements? Well, usually when the parties have, I will recap. To make your technology available, you can rather disclose it through advertisings or awards, or let's say an open initiative, and send me your proposals and I will choose the most attractive one, okay? Or I can choose an ideal partner, which I already know of it. So those are the two ways of choosing your partner. So the most common agreements, once you know who will be working with you, is because you already know your target market. So maybe the most common agreement is not the perfect example, but it is of essence to know exactly the market, okay? So the market conditions your choice of your partner, not vice versa, because otherwise you will be lost. You cannot choose your partner on the grounds of, well, this company is very important, or this company is very relevant, or the price is very cheap, or something, because that in the end will be worthless. You must make the process on reverse. You must first choose the market, you must first choose the target, or at least the idea of your target, and that should not be very complex, at least to have the idea, and then choose your partner. Unless you are very focused on a line of research and you already know who your partner will be, or at least 2 or 3 possible partners, then in that case, yes, you will choose your final partner on more useful grounds such as price, okay? But first is market. And market valuation, of course, the extent of the market, the maturity of the market, the evolution of the market, it's important to decide who your partner will be and how your technology will evolve, okay? If your, for example, if your technology is more focused on the elderly, in the case of Europe, the elderly population is going to increase, unfortunately, okay? Because our growing scheme in Europe is that there are less babies being born and more elderly. So your market will expand, okay? But if you are going to develop or you are going to exploit your technology in very young countries, such as Africa, in some countries of South America, then your strategy will change. In the case of Asia, it's the same. Very young, a lot of young people and a lot of old people. So your market valuation will affect the way you are going to decide how your technology transfer will happen. Okay, and that's very important because in the end, the consumers, the people, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, because in the end you are going to sell, if not to a final consumer, to a distributor, and the distributor is going to put your technology and your product to sell your product or your technology. Your market will define your strategy. Well, negotiations and agreement, of course, I think the most important one is the economic return. The economic return, yeah, most of the time it's a problem, but many times it's a problem because in the case of universities, they don't know what should be returned. Because sometimes when you work in research, as many of you, you are not able to know how much money has been invested on you, on your team, on your department. And you are not capable to discern how many hours you invested in this line of research. So that's a problem. Of course, the easy calculation is, let's say, well, this patent cost X euros, the lawyers another X euros, the agency dealing with the filing X euro, and let's say, well, my team has 7 members, and okay, that can work. But the problem is that it's not the same when the patent has been filed than when the patent has been granted. In the case of a patent, it can last 4 years, 5 years, sometimes say 6, 7, 8, 10 years until since filing until grant, because many things can happen throughout the patent application. So now you are lacking 10 years of life expectancy of the patent, because patents last 20 years. You have already lost 10 years just for the application. So what were you doing throughout that time? Were you just letting your lawyers deal with the patent application, or did you invest more time in developing new technology or related technology? So I'm saying this because It's no easy to calculate how much return are you expecting to receive from your investment. Okay? That's why you should be, or you should have a very clear set of guidelines and protocols in your own departments. Of course, you don't need to have every hour perfectly detailed with the cost per euro, etc. But it's good to know how many people are involved in your team in this line of research. It's good to know whether these people are 100% focused on this, or they share time with other lines of investigation. It's good to know whether these people work on weekdays or also on holidays. So that's a good way of thinking. And of course, the economic return of the investment. You can have a patent granted after 10 years of application. Maybe that patent is worthless. Maybe that patent is useless. Not only because it has a 10-year life expectancy, if all the annuities are paid and if the patent resists any challenge, but also because obsolescence. When you file the patent was excellent, brilliant, wonderful, the best, super new. But once it is granted, yes, of course, the patent reflects the state of the art at the date of filing. So the patent will be valid at that moment. But maybe there have been some other developments, alternative, not dependent, just alternative, because if they are dependent, your patent will be very valuable. Because as I said before, all technology, or mostly all technology, relies and depends on previous technology. But sometimes patents are independent. Sometimes technologies have nothing to do. Internet had something to do with telephone cables for a time. So if you had patents on telephone cables, on wirings, and switches and things like that, you could have a profit. But after 20 years, 15 years, copper wires were removed to provide internet access. So optic fiber entered into the market. So any patents that were dependent or related to that technology not became worthless, but of course the value was very reduced. And another player entered into the market, which was the optic fiber. So I'm saying this because that's another factor to be considered. The length of the patent application. Should I transfer my patent application because it's taking too long to be granted? Is it worth it to pursue this patent until the end for the university? So, depending on that, you should think about your economic return. Okay? Of course, royalties. Royalties is an option when you are dealing with license, because you cannot obtain royalties through the assignment, through the transfer of the technology, through a sale. Royalties are related to license because royalties are payments based on the profits made, or more exactly, on the activity made by the licensee. So it's a payment that you receive in installments. The owner of the technology receives on installments. Sometimes just one installment. Other times a monthly payment, an annual payment. Okay? But the essence of the royalties is that the licensee will pay according to its own performance. So you depend on what the licensee does. If the licensee business is going well, you will receive more royalties. If the licensee business is doing not so well, well, maybe your license is not so profitable as you expect it to be. Okay? IP status. Well, IP status is very important also because, as in the example I I said before, it's not the same to grant a license to a patent that will last 17 years, because usually a patent, if it is not very complicated, can be granted in 3 years, 4 years. So it is reasonable to expect that the patent can be granted in the 4th year, so you will have ideally a license for 16 years. So it's not the same. It's not the same to obtain a license for a patent which has 1 year. I don't know if many of you are aware of what is called patent trolls, which is a rather disparaging term. Usually they are called non-practicing entities, NPEs. NPEs are companies which actively purchase patents that are very close to expiration. Okay, so they purchase patents in the 18th year or in the 19th year. Okay, patents which are perfectly valid, patents which have been granted without problems. Sometimes patents which have been granted, but since they are in the 18th or 19th year, were patents filed in 2000, 2002, 2003, when the current technology was very new, when the current technology was almost some kind of dream, some kind of idea. And when the technology we are enjoying right now was not in force, okay? So they purchased the patent, they purchased the patent in these last years, and they start to enforce it, okay? And they say, well, I'm going to purchase this patent as a bargain because in the 18th year or in 19th year it will be very cheap, and I will try to enforce it as much as I can, sometimes through litigation, sometimes through warning letters, sometimes asking for royalties in a very aggressive way, so I can have a quick return on my investment. So that's another strategy. Okay, it's not the same also to have to pay annuities in the first years than in the last years. I don't know if some of you are aware of this, but the patent annuities are not the same year by year. Each year it increases. So each year it's more expensive to maintain the validity of a patent. The policy, the public policy behind that is that, of course, the state wants that technology to be released to the public as soon as possible. So they increase the prices to maintain that monopoly. But it is also related to the profitability of the patent. Usually the patent, because it can last 20 years, will be more profitable at the end rather than at the beginning, because the technology will be more mature, because the technology will be more dependent on your own patent. So you can ask for royalties for future developments, because technology is not static, technology is always evolving. But I think we talked about this morning. You can research on previous research, and you can patent on previous patent, as long as you prove novelty and inventive step. But maybe you cannot use that patent in the market because you depend on previous authorization of previous patent holders. Okay? So maybe you can just sit on your chair in your department and wait for royalties because you don't need to use your own patent. Just ask for royalties because those dependencies. And that can involve, of course, in the negotiations and in the economic return that you are expecting to receive. Of course, the control of the development, control of exploitation is not the same to grant a license to just use this make money and pay me royalties, then use this, improve it, discover new technology, new applications. Let's share profits, let's share ownership, let's fund these new lines of project, let's, etc. It's not the same, and that can affect the negotiations. And of course the risks. I don't know the exact story of patents in Portugal, but in Spain, for example, when Spain entered the economic European community in 1986, at the same time as Portugal did, we amended our own intellectual property law, our patent law, and we had to offer the applicants the choice of having a patent granted after an exam that will analyze the inventive step and the novelty. But that was a choice, it was not mandatory. So the result was that, according to the former patent law, approximately 80% of all patents applications were just filed without an exam, a proper exam about the validity of the claims, okay? Not a formal exam. Formalities are just who are you, whether you are the inventor or not, pay, that's all, and write the claims properly. But the proper exam ruled about the novelty and the inventive step. Approximately 80% of Spanish patent applications did not have this exam. So, some of them were good patents, solid patents, because the patent attorney or the patent engineer could read the claims, could make some prior searches, state-of-the-art prior searches, and find out that, oh, well, this is novel and has inventive step. But many others did not. But they were patents legally granted and officially granted and enforceable. They could be challenged, of course, but they were enforceable. So, that should be part of your diligence, due diligence, to find out whether, in the case of Spain, year by year these patents are becoming terminated because the lapse of time. But there are many patents, Spanish patents, are still in force without exam, and there are many Spanish patents that are not worth to be protected and can be challenged. Okay, so that's another risk. Maybe you are receiving a license from a Spanish patent that is not so solid or not so strong, or maybe it passed the exam, but you are aware of some technology that the examiner in the European Patent Office or in the INPI was not capable to find. So some magazine publishing, I don't know, in Brazil, but the examiner didn't know about it. And you know about it and say, maybe the first claim is compromised. Maybe 3 claims are compromised. Yeah, they are valid because they have not been challenged, but maybe they can be challenged in the future, so you must take that into account. Those are one of the risks that you should be aware of, the validity, the strength of that technology. Well, until the contract is signed, nothing is real. I think everybody here knows about that. It happens with everything, from purchasing a car to paying the rent of your house. So yeah, that is something that you always bear in mind, signing contracts. Okay, IP contracts. I'm going to explain this very lightly because this is very legalist, and I think the essence is perfectly known by you. Well, a contract is an agreement, okay? Usually in European law, and this applies to Portuguese, Spanish, French law, agreements can be verbal, can be written formally, can be notarized, whatever. In essence, the validity and the strength of the agreement is the same. That's why I told you before about an email. An email can be a contract. An SMS can be, a WhatsApp message can be a contract. So surprisingly, to non-lawyers, yes, a contract doesn't need to be perfectly written or notarized. Or a contract is just an expression of the will of each party. They have agreed to something, and when you sell something through any marketplace platform, you are entering into a contract. Okay? So, mutual approval, offer and acceptance, and binding. Once both parties agree, the contract is binding. So if you have committed to do something, you must do it, otherwise you will pay, or you will make other things. And that's the essence. Contracts are binding. An IP contract is a contract where the IP rights are involved. Usually, and I'm sorry, but I don't know the details of the Portuguese law, usually contracts regarding IP rights don't have any formality. So that's an advantage, because you can make many things. You can grant and transfer and assign many IP rights, but it's also a disadvantage because it's difficult to track all those agreements. So that is why best practices or good practices in transfer technology offices and in university departments include very strict and clear guidelines on how to deal with that agreements. Use the same forms for each contract or each agreement. Avoid conversations through email for this kind of topics, or always do negotiations with other party involved, with other colleague, with somebody acting as a witness, or in a public space, things like that, because you can't always be sure whether a colleague of yours has entered into some kind of agreement, and that can be a problem, as I explained before. For example, I don't know in Portugal, but in Spain, buying a house involves the presence of a notary, public notary. So I cannot buy a house. Well, I could buy a house, just signing a piece of paper, but legally the house won't be mine, legally. I should go with that contract to a notary. The other party, the seller, should come with me, and we both must disclose our will before the notary, so the notary say, okay, they are selling and buying a house. But with IP rights, generally speaking, that doesn't happen. Okay? And as I explained before, it doesn't, those agreements, to be effective, cannot, to be effective, their effectiveness does not depend on the registration in the public file. So sometimes there is no chance to know what happened with that authorization, unless you go to the source, especially if there's no paper track of it, paper or electronic track. Okay, which clauses are affected? Okay, well, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8 topics are, generally speaking, the most important ones in a transfer technology agreement. Okay, and the problem here is that my lecture is according to European practice, to European law, and sometimes our practice differs to contractual practice in the United States or in the United Kingdom. I don't know if the University of Coimbra engages a lot with American universities or American companies, and this could change slightly. But in essence, these 8 topics are the most important ones when dealing with intellectual property transfer agreement. Okay? The introduction, the object, obligations, payment, confidentiality, duration, territory, governing law. Okay? I will not go in order because I think confidentiality is probably one of the most, I wouldn't say complicated, but challenging questions. Because many of you might have might have signed, or your university, an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and think about, okay, then why should I write a confidentiality agreement? So, it is important to know that an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is always a previous stage to an intellectual property agreement, whatever it is, a sale, license, okay? So you enter into an NDA because you are preparing to enter into negotiations, or you are just negotiating this agreement, this or the one, but you are negotiating an agreement. So you sign a non-disclosure agreement. If the parties decide that there's no business, but the information we exchange remain confidential. But after that, we are going to enter into an agreement because we agreed to sell the technology or to license the technology. Throughout the existence of that agreement, of course, we could change further and additional confidential information. So that is why we shall include a confidentiality clause, because the non-disclosure agreement doesn't apply anymore to the information exchange throughout the life of this agreement. And we are not going to sign another non-disclosure agreement because that would be 2 documents, and that will be worthless. So somehow we reduce the essence of the non-disclosure agreement, transform it into a clause. A clause is just a paragraph, longer or shorter, but a paragraph inside the agreement. So, yes, the confidentiality clause is similar. The target or the idea behind the confidentiality clause is the same as to the non-disclosure agreement, but it's inserted into the relationship wherein this agreement applies to. Okay? So, introduction. Well, the parties, that is of essence. An agreement is always made between parties. It can be 1, it can be 2. Of course, you are not going to enter into agreement with yourself. At least 2, but it can be 7, 18, 25 parties. Okay? But each party must be perfectly identified. Okay? And it is of essence because the party that appears in the agreement is the party that will be obliged, and of course will have the rights described therein, described in the agreement. Okay? So, it is important that the party that appears is empowered, is legally empowered to sign the agreement. The person, usually because the parties will be will be companies. So the person, the individual who is signing on behalf of the company, it is important that he or she is entitled and authorized to sign on behalf of the company, because you don't want the contract to be void. Okay? Maybe if you are purchasing a car from the dealership, maybe in the contract appears the name of the dealership. Let's say I don't know, Renault Coimbra. But maybe the person who is signing is just, it's not the manager, it's just somebody from the staff, okay, or some of the mechanics who is not empowered to sign. So you must confirm that the people who is signing has the legal power to do that. Usually, this is confirmed through legal authorization, a notary document, or sometimes it is registered at the company's house. Okay, so you search for the name of the company and you look for anybody who is authorized and you check. Well, yes, this person is authorized. Okay, but that is important. Once the parties are described perfectly, with the address, the number, identification number, etc., then the whereas starts. Okay, the whereas is just, it's an introduction. It has no legal value. Generally speaking, it has no legal value. But it helps. It helps a lot. Because it will help to understand what the parties want and why the parties have agreed to sign this, and what is the idea behind this agreement, and what is the idea of each party. Okay, again, it has no legal value, but if any problem arises, and unfortunately it will arise, the whereas helps the judge or the judges to understand what happened with that agreement. Okay? So, it doesn't have to be a novel, or it doesn't have to be a very long history, no. But at least it should set the mood, okay, of the parties. So, University of Coimbra has been researching in this area. The University of Coimbra discovered this kind of polymer, of this kind of material. The other party is interested in using this material to develop further, blah, blah, blah. So set the idea and why the parties have decided to enter into an agreement. So after that, the clauses are written. The clauses are binding. The clauses are legally binding and are the essence of the agreement. So from the clauses until the end, that's where the legal part, the binding part, lies of the agreement. Okay? And the clauses are, well, the paragraphs and the description of what is transferred or what is licensed, for how long, the territory, whether whether there will be any payments or not. Okay, so there is a determination of the subject matter. What are the IP assets? Okay, so there's an identification, patents, utility models, trade secrets, whatever. So you must describe the technology transfer. If there's a number behind, with the number. If there's technology that is not registered before a public office, then you should enclose an annex, something like that, to describe what are you really transferring. Okay, you have some reference because you can put a number, we assign patent number, X. Okay, there's no need to enclose an annex. But if you are transferring technology, you must somehow describe it. Because otherwise, you don't know what are you really buying or what are you really selling. So that is why a description is always of essence. And of course, the scope of the license, the scope of rights, whether it's exclusive or non-exclusive, territory, possibility of sub-licensing, that is that the licensee also allows another party who was not originally part of this agreement to use the technology. Okay? Further developments, of course. The agreement should include clauses about what will happen whether any of the parties discovers new technology and how the ownership would be shared between the parties. Technical support, of course, because sometimes the technology needs know-how to be put into use. Of course, the closing date, when the agreement starts and when the agreement ends, that's of essence, because sometimes you can sign an agreement today, but it will not enter into force until some date, and that date can be clear, let's say the 1st of June, or that date could depend on when the patent is granted. And that is possible. To say, well, the agreement will start when the assigned patent, which right now is an application, once the patent is granted, the agreement will enter into force, for example. That can happen, okay? And vice versa. The agreement will end at the 5th annuity of the patent, for example, okay? Commercial and financial aspects, okay? Well, that's how the licensee should deal with the use of the technology, and how will, of course, how will pay me as the patent holder. About infringement and disputes, I think we've already explained that this morning extensively, but in essence is who should be defending the technology against third parties. Of course, the product responsibility. The product is the final product wherein the transfer technology lies. Okay, so who should be responsible for the proper use and the warranties of that product? Obligations of the licensor and the licensee. Anti-competitive practices. This could be topic for 2, 3, or 15 lectures, because competition is very important relating to IP. We will not speak about that, but just bear in mind that sometimes the parties should agree on what are they allowed to do according to competition. Okay, so, let's say share territories, forbid purchases from other parties from the competition, set minimal prices, etc. That can be anti-competitive. Of course, the legal regulatory requirements is not the same to sell electronic devices rather than to sell medical devices. Okay, medical devices have a very high level of protection in terms of regulatory aspects. Okay, data protection, etc. It's not the same as selling, I don't know, a pair of sunglasses. Okay, even sometimes sunglasses can be a medical device. The implementation of the agreement, of course, not only when the agreement starts, but how the agreement shall be followed by the parties, whether the milestones are completed, etc., and the expiry of deadline and termination. Okay, sometimes termination is not exactly related to the date. Termination is more related to that date, to that moment before the expiration date. Let's say termination can happen when the licensee does not behave properly. Termination can happen when the expected revenues are not met, so the business is not successful at all. So the deadline of the agreement can be set, let's say on the 2028, but termination may happen before. So termination is usually happens before the deadline that appears in the agreement. Okay, well, as you can see, this is an example. Okay, so the parts highlighted, the highlighted parts are the essence of the clauses. Okay, the idea, as you can see, the licensor grants to licensee. Okay, during the terms of this agreement, a non-exclusive worldwide license. Okay, well, in those few words, the essence, the idea of the agreement is set. I think it's very clear, despite the rest, which is very lengthy. In point B is the same, okay? Licenses and rights to the IP rights and marks as provided. So, rights to the IP and marks are granted. So, we are clearly seeing a difference between what is transferred. And the license shall be considered fully paid and there shall be no royalty. So, we are already knowing that the licensor is not expecting any revenues. Okay? Well, this is another example. As you can see, licensed territory. Okay? Probably there is a definition before about what territory is. Okay? So there's no need to repeat Spain or Portugal or worldwide because there's already a definition of territory. Okay? It's an exclusive license, as you can see. So we know that only the licensee is allowed to use the technology. Okay? To use and have used, to sell and have sold, to offer, to sell, and to import. It's an exclusive license, but only those activities are licensed. So, for example, if we want to follow a very strict, literal interpretation of the clause, then we could find that, for example, research is not authorized. So maybe the licensee is not fully sure whether it can use the technology for research purposes. Or maybe he's confident that within the term to use, research is included. So this, and that should depend on the characteristics of your licensee and the characteristics of the negotiations and your relation. This could be a very clear clause or a very unclear clause. So for some uses could be ideal, for some other uses could not be. So this is an example not of a bad written clause at all, but of a clause that should be interpreted according to the whereas, as I told you before. So that's the reason why the whereas, the introduction, the description of the parties and the reasons why they enter into this agreement is so useful, because otherwise I cannot properly interpret this clause. Okay? Or at least it raised some doubts. Okay? Sub-licensing, for example. There's a very definite paragraph and clause regarding sub-licensing. So we can understand that sub-licensing was important, was relevant for the parties, or at least for the licensee. Sometimes you must look for, in the grant of rights, the sub-licensing, so it's just a line or just a word. In this case, there was a very detailed paragraph. Okay, the licensee may enter into sub-licensing agreements. So it is approved. So there, more than this, the licensee can enter into as many sub-licensing agreements as he wishes to. Sometimes there is only one sub-licensing. Sometimes there is a sub-licensing, but the licensee refrains from doing. Sometimes the sub-license is just for some parts, and the licensee should continue doing the rest of activities. So these are just examples, because license agreements can be as tricky as they are. Okay? License grant, a university, another example. Use and sell licensed products. In the field of use, if you read that, well, what's the field of use? We should go to the definitions. What's the field of use? If we don't find it in the definitions, then how can we find out what's the field of use? Well, look into the whereas. Which are the parties, why they they enter into this agreement. Okay? Again, the licensee has the right to grant sub-license agreements. Okay? Well, licensee's obligations, I think we spoke about this morning, but, well, it's important that the licensee keeps the patent confidential. Of course, as I explained before, a patent per se is not confidential, but since the moment it's disclosed, of course you can have a licensee at the beginning of the filing, and you can disclose the license, the patent application to the licensee at the moment of filing, but it's secret. So the patent must remain the patent application secret. Okay? Not discard, modify, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other proprietary notices. Well, of course, the licensee usually must follow your own instructions of the licensor. If the University of Coimbra grants a license and wants to show the consumers that this technology is approved or it comes from the University of Coimbra, the University of Coimbra shall grant a license of the University of Coimbra trademark to be used. But also the licensee must follow those rules, must include the trademark in the product, must not disparage that trademark, must not put its own trademark bigger than the University of Coimbra, etc. Okay? Of course, comply with all relevant laws and regulations. In the end, it's the licensee, the one who will be doing business with the patent in the market, so he must comply with different regulations. It's not the licensor's problem. Not generate any claims or representations. Of course, the licensee must be true to the essence of the patent, to the essence of the agreement. May not sub-licensee transfer or assign any of its rights. Well, that's ex de facto. The licensee has only the rights that are granted in the agreement. That's why the examples included the sub-license authorization. Licensor's obligations. Well, usually patents include know-how, so making available relevant data to the licensee to carry out its obligations. Of course, you cannot expect that the licensee will perform its duties properly or correctly if you do not make available the know-how to it, of course, because the patent can only be used with know-how, of course, and adhering to all relevant laws in the use of the patent. Well, yes, of course, unless you specifically state that in the agreement, you cannot expect a licensee to use your patent if your patent, if the product or the technology behind the patent cannot be used, let's say. You can obtain a patent, but if your patent affects national defense or national security, you cannot expect your licensee to freely use your technology. Maybe your licensee must obtain some authorization for the Defense Department or something like that, okay? Or maybe in the end, because it affects the radio waves or something like that, or telecommunications, or maybe your licensee cannot use that technology. Or maybe you have some technology related to television broadcast, and your licensee doesn't have any authorization. So the licensee is worthless, unless you specifically disclose that. Okay, you are allowed to use my license if you obtain regulatory approvals. Okay, that's your problem, maybe, or maybe not. Okay, payment. Well, I think we've already spoken about that, about the royalties. Usually the royalties are part of the business profits of the licensee. Usually the royalties apply to the profits obtained before taxes, because otherwise the profits will be very low. Of course, you can increase that, increasing the percentage, but since taxes are not always the same, since taxes apply to different stages depending on the volume of sale, etc., is not a very safe way to calculate your royalties after taxes. So usually royalties apply to to the turnover, the final sales, just the sum of all your sales, apply a percentage. Okay? Yes, regarding the payment, usually the licensor should be allowed to make an audit if it has any suspicions or doubts about the actual figures, the actual numbers. Okay? Of course, it can be obvious because of the agreement and the parties and the addresses of the parties and the scope, the territorial scope of the patent, that the payment will be made in the currency of the country where the license is, but sometimes it is not. In some countries, let's say countries with actual problems of currency or very high inflation rates, let's say, for example, Venezuela or other countries, maybe you're expecting to receive your royalties in US dollars or in euro, not in bolivares, for example. Maybe in Mozambique or, I don't know, in Angola maybe, for example. So it's not always so clear that the currency will be the one that the parties share. Maybe you can agree to another currency. Okay? And sometimes, depending on the degree of reliability and on trust, sometimes the agreement should be notarized, for example, to have more legal strength. Because if it's not notarized, some party could discuss whether that copy is the original one or that copy has been modified. If you have a notarized agreement, then it's true in itself. It cannot be discussed, the contents. It can be discussed, the interpretation, but not the contents. If the contract is not notarized, some party can challenge that. Well, that's not the oldest that's not the newest version. That's the oldest version, and there's another that supersedes this one. Okay, so who shall pay those costs? Well, that should be, of course, agreed in the document, and notarization of a contract doesn't have to happen at the beginning. It can happen afterwards. You can start a relationship very confidently, but after 2 years, you start having doubts about your licensee. Then you go to the notary and make it reinforce the strength of the document. So who shall bear those fees? Me, both parties, half by half. So that should be included in the agreement. Okay. Well, regarding the royalties, an upfront payment. Okay. Let's say a lump sum to the licensor, milestones, installments, okay, and royalties, which is according to the performance. Upfront payment and milestones usually are not related to the actual performance of the licensee. They are just sums of money that I consider to be profitable to me, okay, but they do not depend on the performance. So they are usually paid before the business has started or at the very early stages of the business. But when the business keeps on going and it's profitable, then ideally you should receive royalties, and as I said before, those are a percentage of the turnover. Okay, an IP valorization report is recommended. Well, of course, if you don't know how much your technology values by yourself, ask a third party to make a valuation, then you will know how much could you ask for. Okay, this is very common because many times nobody knows how much valuable is your own technology, so you must ask for help to a specialized party. Okay, confidentiality, I think I have already explained that, okay, about confidentiality and additional, and an NDA, okay. Well, sometimes requires an additional NDA. As I said before, sometimes it does not. That would depend on the length and specifications of the confidentiality clause. For me, in my practice, to my clients, I usually discourage signing another NDA, because that's another document and that's another problem. I think the parties are, it's more useful to them to have just one document. And that document, more lengthy or less lengthy, but that document should be the one ruling the relation. If you start saying, okay, no, but this is ruled by this other document. No, this is ruled by this another agreement. I think it's a level of complexity that is not useful at all. Okay? Well, of course, the duration of the agreement, I think we have already spoken about that. The territory, one thing I want you to be very clear about. One thing is the territorial extent of your right, which is usually related to the country. Let's say a Spanish patent has only effects in Spain, Portuguese patent has only effects in Portugal, a European patent does not have effects in Europe. The European patent has effects in each European and non-European country where the patent has been approved, okay? So you must be aware of that. And another thing is the territorial scope of your authorization. It is not a problem to authorize a party to use your Spanish patent worldwide. It's absurd, because your Spanish patent doesn't have any more protection to Spain, outside Spain. But you can agree to a license agreement worldwide, and you can control what happens outside Spain. Maybe you cannot have a new patent outside Spain because it would lack novelty. Okay, so you only have one Spanish patent, but you can control what your licensee does about developing new technology or something like that. So you can have a worldwide use authorization for a Spanish patent or for a Portuguese patent. So those things are not interchangeable and are complementary. Okay? Well, governing law, I think we explained this this morning in depth, but keep the idea that governing law is of essence. Usually when both parties belong to the same country and share or use an IP right that is protected in that country, and the agreement is only focused to that country, the more sensible solution is that the governing law will be the common law, okay? But this is not, this doesn't happen always. You will have to deal with foreign companies, with foreign institutions, and you will have to deal and to agree which will be the governing law. Sometimes you will have to cave in to the counterpart's national law. Sometimes you should choose a neutral law. Let's say a Portuguese company or a Portuguese university doing business with a French company, maybe the ideal governing law should be Spanish, neutral, okay? It doesn't benefit any party, okay? So it's important. So, of course we should negotiate through a non-disclosure agreement. All of you are already aware of that. This is of essence. Both parties must be comfortable with that. Remember that the non-disclosure agreement is an agreement, okay? Remember that the non-disclosure agreement can and will outlive the term where the disclosure of confidential documents existed. Okay, so it's enforceable. Okay, it can be brought before courts. You can, if any of the parties disclose the confidential information or part of it, it can be sued. Okay, and the consequences can be very, very important, because confidential information, disclosure of confidential information cannot be, you cannot go back in time. Once you disclose confidential information, it will not be confidential anymore, and it can never be confidential back again. So consequences are very important and can be very expensive. Of course, it's dissuasive because it is binding, it is enforceable. Sometimes NDAs include a penalty clause. Sometimes because the value of the confidential information is invaluable, sometimes it includes a clause that can be, of course, more dissuasive. Sometimes you will find NDAs with clauses of $1 million, $2 million, $20 million. Okay? So it's useful and it happens. And of course, traceability. Sometimes confidential NDAs include a clause saying, okay, well, only the information exchange that includes a stamp saying confidential will be considered confidential. That's not useful, because sometimes you can forget, sometimes there's no chance to include that seal or that stamp. So it's useful because within a time frame, everything that's exchanged, whatever it is, an email, a contract, just a sheet of paper, an SMS, a WhatsApp conversation, everything is confidential, so you can make traceability. Okay? Okay, common contracts. Well, I think we've already spoken about this, about the sale, the direct transfer, the complete transfer of proprietary technology. Okay? Usually this is between an employee or a service provider and a company. Yeah, sometimes, but it can happen between companies. This morning I spoke about vertical relations. It can happen in the frame of a vertical relation, horizontal relations. Okay? It's a very simple contract. Okay? It has no difference with purchasing a car or a house, except with the IP due diligence we spoke some slides before. Okay? Turnkey agreement, as I explained to you in a prior slide, a turnkey agreement is just the transfer of the property, but with the technology ready to be used since the very beginning. Okay, once you receive the technology, you can start using it in a profitable way the day after. Okay, so somebody must perform all those activities to transform that technology in something usable, in something profitable. Okay, sometimes it's the seller itself, so the seller sells you the technology and only handles it to you once it is ready to be used. Sometimes the seller is not capable of doing that, so the seller must look for another party to do that instead of it. Okay? As an example, well, the technology supplying company agrees to undertake the full range of technical and managerial operations required to establish an enterprise in full operating condition to the local owner. Okay? License agreement. I think this is extremely clear for you at this time. I hope so. So we will pass to the next slide. Franchise. I told you before that it's a special kind of intellectual property license. A franchise agreement is a specific type of contractual relationship in which one entity allows other firms to use its business model as the basis for operating their business. So, once again, it's a ready-to-use transfer. Okay? A joint venture. I've already explained that. The idea behind a joint venture is to establish an alliance to conduct a very specific business or in a very specific territory or for a very determined period of time. After that, maybe we will create a new company, maybe we will dissolve the joint venture, maybe we will sell the business to another party. This is very usual. For example, when hedge funds are involved, they are dealing with money, they just want to make some business profitable and sell it and collect the money. So sometimes they create a joint venture, okay? Well, as I explained in the slide, alliances are not always equal, depending on the technologies being transferred. Well, that's for sure. You rely on your partner because your partner has some qualities and some and can perform some activities that you cannot. So yeah, you should find a balance between what you provide and what you receive from your partner. Examples, joint ventures, okay, Sony Ericsson, which I don't know if it's still alive, but for a very long period of time, it was a very successful joint venture. Sony never had any experience with cell phones in the past. They did many electronic equipment for music and for video cameras, etc., but never for cell phones. Ericsson was managing extremely good in, I think it was Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. So they created Sony Ericsson. Kellogg with Wilmar, well, it's a joint venture to introduce the Kellogg products into China, a very difficult market per se, because China is another world in many means, in many sense. And the Walt Disney Company, well, you know that Walt Disney nowadays, after several purchases and after several joint ventures, has introduced itself into television broadcasting, streaming broadcasting, and many different products. You can find classics and cartoons in the catalog, but you can find the Star Wars franchise and many other things purchased by Walt Disney. In this case, they created a joint venture for a streaming service, which is Hulu. I don't know, in Portugal it's online, but in Spain it is not Hulu, okay? Well, the spin-off, an example is the memory foam, with NASA, okay? I think many of you know about the Tempur mattresses and Tempur pillows, which are made of a special foam made by NASA. Those pillows and mattresses are expensive, but anybody can purchase them at any shop, okay? And they are made of a very specific material discovered and protected by NASA, which was used in well, spaceships and equipment of the astronauts, and its application to mattresses and pillows was never considered, and it is a very successful spin-off. Okay, university spin-offs and spin-outs. Well, spin-out is the finish of the spin-off when it's a proper company itself, absolutely disengaged from the university, which is the ideal of a spin-off. Okay. Well, I think you already know all this. Just the idea is that a spin-off is the business side of the university, and it must be as such, because the university is the The idea of universities is another idea. It's not business, but in the end, the university must do businesses. So that's why spin-offs. Well, M&A. Sometimes it's not possible to purchase isolatedly a technology, because the technology is so related to the very essence of the company, or because the technology is the company itself. Okay, maybe Tesla right now has at least two different businesses, which is SpaceX and Tesla. So, well, some dedicated to space, other ones dedicated to electric vehicles and so on. Okay, but if Tesla was only dedicated to electric vehicles, well, the technology lying behind, whether it was for the Tesla car or the Tesla truck or whatever, is the same. So the very essence of the company would be those electronic developments or electric developments. So maybe purchasing the technology itself would not be feasible. So you should acquire the whole company, which is going, maybe it will be rather expensive. Okay. In technology acquisition or merger, of course, you have technology, you must do some technology scouting, analysis of patents, because sometimes you can find some technology to be segmented or to be purchased independently. That would depend on the maturity and the extent of the company. Of course, the technical and legal analysis, you already know about that. We talked about it in the IP due diligence. Portfolio evaluations is the same. Okay, and usually you purchase to grow. Okay, so everybody grows. Of course, in a merger and an acquisition, not a party loses, but some people will lose, some people will be fired because you will have dual jobs and things like that. But in the end, when a company is purchased, it's because its future will be better with the purchaser, okay, and not by alone. Okay, examples of this was Android Incorporated. It was acquired by Google. It was a very successful purchase because today the operation, the OS of all Android, of all Google cell phones runs or is Android, and also Android has a very successful scheme of licenses to other cell manufacturers, which use Android as an OS. Citrix goes private. Well, Citrix was a software company which developed some solutions for virtual private networks, okay, in the context of telecommunications and streaming services, and merged with TIPCO, and they formed Cloud Software Group, which is nowadays a rather successful company. And Microsoft acquired Nokia. I don't know if any of you remember, but some years ago you were able to buy Microsoft cell phones. I think they are not, it is not possible anymore, but for some years there were Microsoft cell phones thanks to the purchase of Nokia.
This concludes the final session of the Capacity Building Programme for Technological Infrastructures. We thank you for your participation and hope that you have found the series enjoyable and effective.